Hello, this is Tim, and there's two issues really of concern today. The first is about the European Court of Human Rights, the ECHR, and its emergency ruling for the release of Mr. Navalny, who has now lost his last appeal and will be shipped off to a remote penal colony somewhere in Russia, and he will have great difficulty getting messages to his lawyers or indeed to his family. Russia says that the European Court of Human Rights ruling is a direct and crude interference in domestic politics. But Russia is not fully recognizing its responsibility here because it is a member of the Council of Europe. You cannot have it both ways, as the European Union has repeatedly told Britain. I'm very concerned about Mr. Navalny. I think he represents a focus of opposition or a focus of concerns that are rational and reasonable and expressed at the moment across Russia. I don't think he represents a viable presidential alternative at the moment, but the longer he is persecuted, the more he will actually become a focus, and actually also the more his life will be in jeopardy. The much more desirable approach would be to see proper reform taking place. Now, the second issue really is about reform. The second issue is about British oysters, and the story is mind-boggling, and the two things are linked. So, because really we're looking at Europe from both ways. On the one hand, we're looking at something positive. On the other hand, we're looking at something negative. But that negative thing is not simply Europe's fault, as I hope I will explain. Nobody comes out of this story. Nobody comes out of really anything that I'm talking about today very well. Maybe I don't come out terribly well, but we will see. Please, by all means, subscribe to my channel and please leave your comments. I'm always interested to hear your comments, whether they are supportive or critical of what I've got to say. I'm just throwing things out there. Now, as for oysters, we knew back in 2018 from the Shellfish Association, the NTTO and the SFF, the worshipful company of fishmongers and shellfish business people. We knew back in 2018 that a no-deal Brexit would be a catastrophe to the oyster industry. We were told then about a danger to the oysters in the smooth, unimpeded trade that had hitherto gone on. The UK supplies a lot of oysters to Europe, and it is the main supplier of the European lobster. But otherwise, I'm afraid it's not the main supplier of European shellfish. But it is a major supplier, or it has been up till now. Think crabs, cuttlefish, mussels, and clams. Now, when you look at it from a European point of view, yes, there are alternatives, and I'm sure there'll be a race to fill the gap if the British supplies are not getting through to the European customers. But the shellfish sector in the UK, shellfish is the largest of the three fishing sectors, accounting for 36% of all fish landed in the UK. That's about £339 million annually. This is a significant amount. More importantly, this is the actual livelihood of numerous small fishing traders. Think of those scallopers, those extraordinary boats that go out to sea looking for shellfish. Think of all the shellfish processing plants dotted around the port towns of our country. The concerns expressed so clearly in 2018 were about possible tariffs that would cost the industry, we were told, about £41 million a year. The tariffs have gone in the trade deals reached at Christmas, but the shellfish trade has been hit by a European classification of the quality of our seawaters. This was not an issue while we were in the EU, but immediately our waters become suspect once we leave. And by the way, this was a rule that was already in place. So this should have been seen. Now, there have been some bizarre responses. There have been some bizarre responses to this crisis. I don't think the oyster problem has really caught the public imagination, despite some of these more eccentric responses. The best one is from a Scottish businessman called Jamie Macmillan, who runs the Loch Fyne langoustine and sea farm business in up in Scotland. And he threatened to dump piles of rotting shellfish outside number 10. He didn't carry out his threat, but I think he was quite right to be angry and to be so vivid in portraying that anger. He says, "My family's fishing boats were all tied up. They are all tied up. We can't get our product to the EU because of red tape." I'm sure that's still the case. He said this back in January. The problem here is that the shellfish are now caught up in a net of permanent red tape. They are caught up in a red tape trap. This is about oversight, not only by our government in number 10 in Downing Street, but also by the administration in Scotland. So I say, nobody comes off well in this. And this is a problem that could have been anticipated and dealt with. In the post-war years, we witnessed an iron curtain, Churchill said, descending. It cut off Western Europe from the East. Now we have a red tape curtain that will cut Britain off from Europe. It undermines the trade agreement that was reached in December, and it demonstrates adroitly that the big arguments in favour of Brexit were not fully thought through by the Brexiteers, by the Leave camp. I remember very specifically being asked to do an advert for the Leave group about the advantage of the Leave vote to fishing. Here's some of the advert here. Now, we were using the fishing industry, or the Leave campaign was using the fishing industry as a demonstration of who was going to benefit from Brexit. But the fishing people have not benefited. Now, there are some things that can be self-tested in the fishing industry and in food in general, but much cannot. And it is this failure to recognise common shared standards that undermines the Christmas trade agreement and will continue to do so. Cross-border food supplies are competitive and time sensitive. That's the problem. The extra cost and the extra delay is something that can mean poverty and the loss of what were, a couple of years ago, quite healthy, viable small businesses. Now, the government may be committed to cutting back on regulations at home, but it must acknowledge the mountain of regulations, the net of red tape already building up in Calais and in Dover and in any way that we interface with our European neighbours. At the moment, the full force of this red tape net is reduced for the next 6 months. but it could well hit us much harder after June, just when we are coming out of the COVID lockdown. So, as I say, this is sort of a positive and a negative image of Europe. The European Court of Human Rights is something I personally am very grateful to. The red tape is something that we should have been committed to cutting back for years. Instead, I think we were distracted. Now we have left, that red tape has come to bite us all. This does nobody any good. If the waters were so substandard when we were in Europe, then they should have been improved. If they were substandard then, they should not be substandard. If they were acceptable then, they should not be substandard now. The red tape is based on an illogical position. It needs challenging. It needs cutting back. We need to cut through this red tape trap. So anyway, there we are. So do by all means subscribe to my channel. Do leave your comments, positive and negative. I really enjoy the debate that some of these chats stimulates, and I will be back later on this week with another story, I hope. So also let me know what stories I should be covering. Let me know what you're interested in, and I will try as best I can to cover the particular story.